Every morning inside Balmoral, long before the first light of day touches the peaks of the Cairngorms, there is a ritual that outsiders would find strange, even unsettling. If a royal family member has just stepped out of a room, the staff who enter next must curtsy to the empty space. It doesn't matter if the prince or princess has already left and the air is still, the bow is to the lingering spirit of the royal presence. For over 150 years, this rule has remained untouched. New staff often laugh nervously the first time they're asked to bend their knees to no one, but those who last long enough stop finding it funny. At Balmoral, tradition is heavier than the granite walls themselves, and this is only the beginning. Vacuum cleaners are strictly forbidden. Instead, maids shuffle on hands and knees with stiff horsehair brushes, inch by inch over the carpets, sometimes spending an hour on a single hallway. Wrists swell, backs stiffen, but complaints are swallowed. They work days that stretch 15, sometimes 18 hours, and yet their wages fall below the national minimum. Speaking is just as restricted as rest. The rule is clear: no words unless addressed first. A single maid once described life at Balmoral as like being owned by shadows. But what truly broke the silence wasn't just the grueling routine. It was a discovery so disturbing that in one summer, dozens of workers quit in a single night. The strange world of Balmoral begins not in Scotland, but in the private longings of Prince Albert. In the summer of 1852, he spotted a smudged advertisement for a Highland estate. It was rain-soaked and unremarkable, but something about the words caught his imagination. Without telling Queen Victoria, he quietly arranged to buy it. The cost was $32,000, about $32,000 then, which would equal around $4.4 million today. For most families, that kind of secrecy would cause a scandal. For Albert, it was just another way of protecting his vision. Within a few years, the old house that came with the estate was torn down completely. In its place rose something far grander, a granite castle that would become the royal family's most private refuge. By 1856, Balmoral Castle stood finished, its pale stone glittering against the Scottish hills. Albert was no distant overseer. He personally sketched the clock tower, selected the details of the windows, and insisted on fresh air circulating through the corridors. He wanted Balmoral not just as a home, but as a statement of permanence. As the years passed, the estate grew and grew, swallowing valleys, rivers, and mountains. What began as a modest purchase ballooned into more than 53,000 acres, larger than San Francisco, larger than Paris. It was not just a castle, but a kingdom within a kingdom. The land held over 150 separate buildings, its own electricity supply, and eventually its own railway built in 1866. That 3-mile line existed for one purpose only: to move royal luggage in secret. Unlike Windsor or Buckingham, Balmoral did not belong to the state. It was a private possession, personally owned by the royals. That meant when deer were sold or when cottages were rented to outsiders, the money flowed into their accounts, not the public purse. Members of Parliament raised concerns. Some called it improper. But Edward VII dismissed them flatly, calling Balmoral the family's inescapable refuge, and he never gave up an inch of it. The appearance of Balmoral itself added to its mystique. To visitors arriving for the first time, the castle seemed torn from the pages of a Scottish fairy tale. Its granite walls gleamed pale in the sunlight, sometimes sparkling as if dusted with silver. But what looked like whimsy was built on calculation. Prince Albert designed every element to serve a purpose. He ordered carvings of each of his 9 children near the doorway, a kind of stone family portrait that would outlast them all. He narrowed the hallways deliberately, so family members would be forced to bump into each other to share space, to avoid drifting apart. The clock tower, modeled on a German castle from Albert's youth, was tuned to chime in E-flat. The reasoning was both practical and charming. He didn't want the sound to frighten the ponies grazing nearby. Not everyone was impressed. Some critics sneered that the building looked like a giant cold barn, but ridicule never stopped imitation. Within just 2 decades, more than 80% of new country homes across Scotland were built in Balmoral's style. For Queen Victoria, the critics missed the point entirely. To her, Balmoral smelled of pine and freedom, a place where the chains of court life finally loosened. But while the castle glowed with romanticism for its royal owners, it meant something entirely different for the workers who kept it alive. When the royal family makes their way to Balmoral, they never arrive alone. Their presence brings with it an entire miniature army, sometimes numbering over 150 staff. There are gillies who know the land like their own skin, horse handlers to manage the stables, cooks, cleaners, gardeners, and even one man whose sole purpose is to stand below the monarch's window at precisely 7 o'clock each morning and play the bagpipes. His job is not symbolic, not occasional. It is daily, and he must play without fail. The haunting sound of the pipes floating over the hills signals that the royal household is awake. Every one of these workers is bound by an agreement of silence. It is not just a contract, it is a vow. They must promise for life that they will not speak of what they see, hear, or suspect. Break that vow and you're dismissed instantly. Stories circulate of workers who once spoke too freely at a pub and never found employment again. The work itself borders on endless. Dozens of silver pieces must be polished until they shine like mirrors. Fireplaces in more than 50 rooms must be kept burning, and mud-soaked hunting boots must be scrubbed free of every stain before they can be worn again. Balmoral consumes 60 tons of birchwood each season, and the labor to keep fires fed is constant. Cottages must be kept ready for guests, horses brushed, tables laid with precision. And through it all, silence reigns. Some staff cannot speak unless spoken to directly. Others are expected to live on the grounds year-round and even participate in the seasonal culling of deer. Each winter, hundreds of deer are killed on the estate, a practice as controversial as it is ancient. The workers are expected to support it, no matter their feelings. Wages for all this effort total over $3 million each year, much of it funded not by the crown, but by timber sales and tourism rentals. For the workers themselves, though, the money often doesn't feel like enough. But once a year, something extraordinary happens at Balmoral. Since 1858, each September brings the Gillies Ball, the single night of the year where tradition softens and the walls between the royals and their staff blur. At 7 in the evening, the ball begins. The king takes the floor first, leading the opening dance. Even the lowest-ranking dishwasher or maid may find themselves whirling across the floor in the arms of a prince or princess. The night feels like a strange dream, like slipping into another world. For some workers, it is the only time they are truly seen as more than silent shadows in the halls. Princess Diana once described the ball as something between a high school prom and a scene from Downton Abbey. Glamorous but tinged with awkwardness. Still, the hierarchy never truly disappears. Even the invitations themselves carry markers of rank. A golden edge means you are among the closer staff, valued and trusted. A plain card means you are further down the chain. At midnight, the royals slip away from the ballroom, leaving the staff behind. Everyone bows once more, even in their exhaustion, and the spell of equality dissolves back into silence. For years, whispers have escaped the ball despite the strict rules. Stories of Prince Philip spiking the punch with gin to lighten the mood. Stories of Prince Charles dancing barefoot late into the night. In 1991, one young footman sold a detail about a barefoot dance to the tabloids and was fired immediately. From then on, cameras were forbidden entirely. Yet for many staff, the Gillies Ball remains the single bright spot of the year. The one night when laughter fills the room, rules bend, and even the king might be called by his first name. Balmoral's location makes it more than just a castle. It is a vault for secrets, hidden deep in the Scottish Highlands, accessible only by a single winding road. It has always offered the perfect escape from scrutiny. Queen Victoria's unusually close bond with her servant John Brown flourished here, away from the judgment of London society. Years later, Edward VIII used Balmoral as the place to rehearse his abdication speech, speaking into the lonely air of the mountains before he shocked the world. Even in tragedy, Balmoral played its role as a shield. When Princess Diana died in 1997, her sons William and Harry were kept at the castle, away from television, away from the noise of the nation's grief, at least for a few hours. Still, not everything stayed hidden. In 2019, a cleaner leaked photographs of the Royal Children's Treehouse, an innocent structure made scandalous only by its secrecy. Years earlier, another worker revealed odd details. The Queen Mother's preference for Dubonnet, Prince Andrew's insistence on having exactly 28 golf balls. He was paid $90,000 for the information, but the royal family sued. Since then, Balmoral's defenses have only tightened. Drones are no longer able to fly near the castle. Invisible sky fences now block them. Guards and staff monitor even the air above. The message is clear: Balmoral's secrets are not for the world to see. Yet life for the staff goes on, steady and grinding. Their days begin before the sun rises, usually around 6 in the morning. The youngest maids shuffle into the oldest kitchen, where they begin the morning with silver polishing, 200 pieces, each one gleaming by the time breakfast is served. By 8, trays are carried through the stone corridors. Teapots must be delivered without clattering, steps taken carefully to avoid waking the royal dogs. Then comes preparation for lunch, peeling as much as 18 kilograms of potatoes in a single morning. After lunch, uniforms are swapped for clean ones because appearances must never falter. At 4, it is time for afternoon tea, served with all the delicacy expected by centuries of tradition. And when the hunting parties return, the staff are waiting again, ready to scrub mud from boots and clothing. By evening, when most of the world is winding down, Balmoral's staff are still moving. Fires must be fed, halls tidied, tables cleared, boots polished again. At last, by 9:45 in the evening, they climb to their attic rooms. These are 15-hour shifts with no overtime. In the staff manual, one line explains why. Loyalty is its own reward. For outsiders, it seems cruel. For those within, it is simply reality. One maid later described it in words that chilled historians. It was like giving your life to a shadow, and no one ever said thank you. The rules of silence extend beyond conversation. Technology itself is restrained by tradition. For decades, vacuum cleaners were banned within Balmoral's walls. Queen Elizabeth reportedly hated their sound, considering them disruptive. Instead, 2 maids would crawl along the rugs with horsehair brushes, pushing dust out fiber by fiber. Brushing one hallway alone could take 45 minutes. The dust clung so heavily to their aprons that some had to rinse and change twice in a single day. By one estimate in 1990, the ban on vacuums added 9 hours of work daily. Yet pay never shifted upward. The staff suffered aching wrists and stiff joints, some unable to eat properly after their shifts. Complaints remained unspoken. Balmoral looked perfect on the outside, but inside, quiet pain lay beneath every immaculate carpet. And the silence wasn't only about chores, it extended to words themselves. In July of 1986, one maid was dusting when she overheard Prince Charles whisper something to Diana. She thought nothing of it, but another servant hissed at her to act deaf. The next morning, she received a written warning. At Balmoral, there was a rule unbroken. You must never register what a royal says. If you are caught twice, you are dismissed, and the modest end-of-season bonus, about $250, vanishes. The staff learned to communicate with hand signs. Subtle gestures passed between them like signals in a silent play. Some later said the castle's halls were quieter than a library, not out of respect, but out of fear. Silence was survival. Money at Balmoral has always been a strange contradiction. The estate itself is vast and wealthy, spanning more than 50,000 acres with forests, farmland, and holiday cottages that earn millions each year. But for those who serve inside the castle, the pay is shockingly small. Many housemaids earn no more than $25,000 annually, and that is before the long hours take their toll. In exchange, they live in small attic rooms, often sharing space with others, their free time dictated by schedules that leave little room for a personal life. The estate tries to sweeten the deal by offering free accommodation, heating, and meals, but even those are not without strings. Meals are carefully rationed, and some staff later recalled feeling like they lived on the edge of poverty while working in one of the richest households in the world. During the 1980s, a few dared to complain, but nothing changed. Those who spoke out were quietly replaced by younger workers eager for the status of serving the royal family. In truth, loyalty was exploited, and the prestige of the job was treated as payment in itself. This inequality extended far beyond money. A deep gender divide cut through Balmoral's halls. Men, especially those who worked as gillies or estate keepers, were given more freedom, better rooms, and more leniency in their duties. They could sometimes speak casually to the royals, share a drink with a prince after a hunt, or relax during off hours without scrutiny. Women, by contrast, were often invisible unless something went wrong. Their uniforms had to be immaculate, their voices soft, their behavior modest at all times. Even when men and women performed identical work, men were paid more. Some female staff described it as living in a time capsule. The castle itself was modernized over the decades with electricity, plumbing, and eventually Wi-Fi. But the culture inside its walls felt stuck in the 19th century. One young maid said she was never allowed to eat in front of male staff, even during lunch breaks. Another remembered being scolded for wearing lipstick in the kitchen because it was seen as too bold. At Balmoral, tradition was not just a word, it was a cage, and tradition showed itself in even stranger ways. Perhaps the most infamous of these customs was the rule of the curtsy. Each morning, staff had to curtsy or bow to the Queen, even if they had already greeted her an hour earlier. Imagine passing the same hallway 3 times in a single day, each time lowering yourself to the floor in deference. The same rule applied to the King, to the Prince of Wales, to visiting royals, sometimes to foreign guests. It was not optional, it was compulsory. Workers trained for weeks to perfect the right depth of curtsy or bow, as failing to do it properly was seen as disrespectful. Some staff even developed back problems from the repetitive movements. And yet, no matter how exhausting or humiliating it felt, the rule endured. To the royal family, it was never cruelty, it was heritage. To the workers, it was a reminder every day of their place in the invisible hierarchy. Yet even the strongest walls cannot keep every secret inside forever. Despite the lifelong contracts of silence, leaks have always found their way into the outside world. The most notorious came in 2001 when a former butler sold his story to a tabloid, revealing intimate details of the Queen Mother's habits. He spoke of her love of gin and her habit of keeping a bell to summon staff at all hours. The fallout was immediate. He was condemned in the press, and the palace doubled down on its restrictions. In 2019, another breach occurred when a cleaner leaked a photograph of the royal children's treehouse, an image that seemed harmless but violated the sacred privacy of Balmoral. That cleaner was dismissed within a day. Over the years, other odd details slipped out, like Prince Andrew demanding a bathtub filled with precisely 41 degrees of water, or Princess Margaret insisting her bath be drawn twice daily. These glimpses into the hidden routines of Balmoral fascinated the public, but for the staff, they were reminders of how dangerous even a casual word could be. For the workers themselves, the silence was rarely about respect. It was about survival. Many carried the weight of unspoken stories for decades, long after they left Balmoral. A few who broke their vows in old age described the experience as both liberating and terrifying. One former housemaid confessed in her 70s that she had once seen Queen Elizabeth walking alone at midnight in the gardens, speaking softly to herself. The maid never knew what words the Queen whispered, but the memory haunted her. Another worker recalled finding Prince Charles asleep in the library, surrounded by stacks of poetry, looking far more fragile than the world ever knew. These fragments, small and human, reveal a truth about Balmoral. Behind the grandeur and ritual lies a fragile, complicated family bound by the same struggles as anyone else. But for the staff, to share these truths was forbidden. There is also the strange irony that while Balmoral demands total silence, it is the place where the royals themselves speak most freely. Away from cameras, microphones, and the scrutiny of Parliament, Balmoral becomes the one place where kings and queens can laugh too loudly, stumble in the hallways, or even argue in anger. It is where Queen Victoria allowed herself to grieve openly, where George VI sought peace during World War II, where Queen Elizabeth found refuge in the aftermath of Diana's death, and where Charles now builds his own rhythms of rule. The castle has always been a paradox, both a prison of tradition and a sanctuary of privacy. And in that paradox, the workers have always played their part, quietly, invisibly, and without thanks. By the time the summer season ends and the royal family departs, The staff begin the work of shutting down the estate. Fires are extinguished, silver packed away, guest cottages locked. For a few months each year, Balmoral grows quiet, its halls empty but for the year-round caretakers who tend the land. Then, as spring approaches, the cycle begins again. Workers return, some new, some veterans of decades. They step back into their uniforms, rehearse their bows, and prepare for another season of silence. For them, Balmoral is less a job than a life sentence, one chosen but not easily escaped. The castle remains what it has always been, a place of power, beauty, and control, where tradition outweighs comfort, and silence is the price of survival. And so, when you hear the stories of Balmoral, the grand hunting parties, the Gillies Ball, the image of royals strolling the misty grounds, you must remember the people you will never see. The housemaids polishing silver until their hands crack. The butlers walking on aching feet through endless corridors. The Gillies waiting in the rain for the hunts to return. Their lives are lived in the margins of history, erased by design and bound by rules that few outsiders could ever imagine. In many ways, Balmoral is not just a royal retreat. It is a living museum of another time, where hierarchy, secrecy, and silence are still as strong as the granite walls that hold the castle together. The workers themselves are its most invisible exhibits, necessary, unacknowledged, and forever silent.